Hello friends, this is Arvind Jesse, and again I have come with something really important. Categorically for those who have a propensity for creative properties of English. And to be more specific, poem. How to write a poem. Now there are many people that I've met through variety of walks of life who have a certain inclination to write a poem, but they simply cannot. And they end up feeling that there is some natural tendency that some people are blessed with, as a result of which they are able to craft these otherworldly, gratifying poems. But them, they feel don't have the talent or don't have that natural feel for that. But I beg to differ. Not that natural talent is nothing, it is important, it comes in handy. But even if you don't have that, you can still craft a poem. You can still, dare I say, craft a top tier poem. And for the same, I've come with a formula. Let's dive a bit deeper. Let's first decide a theme. Theme is a highly integral aspect of a poem. One must bear in mind that the poem, from its first line till the last line, must carry the elements of its theme. Let's take conflict as our theme. Now we need to arrive at two. So, my dear friends, let's take the easiest theme to craft a top tier poem. And the theme that I'm recommending is conflict. You must have read a very famous poem by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged. And in there you'll realize there is a great conflict in between two roads. And that's one theme which is highly popular and at the same time easy as well. Easy as well to craft a poem around it. So our theme for the day is conflict. Now we need to arrive at two opposing prepositions, scenarios, ideologies, situations, etc. to provide for a plot to our poem. And now conflict in between what? Let's think of two opposing predispositions, scenarios, ideologies, and situations. Let's take situations to make it a bit more easier. What could our two opposing situations be which could give us our ideal conflict? Let's dive a bit deeper. Let's take the dilemma of giving the competition exam or not. Now we are here at Anushka and we meet thousands of students on a daily basis who are bidding to clear one of these competition exams to land a job in the government sector. So it's not uncommon a feeling in those students, especially those who aren't as handsomely prepared as they would have liked to. They are at various stages of their preparation confronted whether or not they should appear for the exam. So we can take the same theme or same conflict which is inside the mind of the student when he's feeling that he hasn't prepared as handsomely as he should have to clear the exam, wherein he feels whether or not he should give the exam. Let's take that conflict into consideration and maybe write a poem around it. Now the lines above, for example, we skipped one aspect. Let's go back. For example, I am in a dilemma, comma, I am in confusion, comma, I don't know what to do. These three are some simplistic commonplace lines that one may arrive at when he wants to write a poem based on the conflict which is inside here in his mind, whether or not to appear for the competition exam which has the potential of landing him a job in the government sector. Now, if you really dissect these lines and read them, they'll fail to trigger that effect. And we'll find that in the next paragraph as to why. Let's dive even deeper. Now, the lines above do convey the plot. Yes, of course, those three lines definitely do deliver the goods. But is it good enough? The plot, but doesn't quite pack a punch. We need more striking lines. Let's try and understand it more. This dilemma of whether or not to give the exam has triggered confusion in your mind. Now, those lines, as I've said, do deliver the goods. They do the job well, but we are writing a poem here, and we need to achieve that level of effect when our reader will read it. So to achieve that effect, maybe those lines weren't enough. They weren't packing the punch as written in the paragraph there. So now what can we do? What could be our resolve? Now think of a word which is like confusion but sounds otherworldly. Now this is the first step. We've begun to craft the poem. Our first baby step, let's call it a baby step, that we need to take is we need to think of a word which is similar to confusion. Because here we are talking about a conflict in the mind of a student who is in this dilemma whether or not to give that exam as he is simply not prepared enough. What could be that word? Can you think of that word which is like confusion but has that alien effect to it? Let's find out. Now that word is flummox. Flummox is a word that is extremely similar to confusion, but in effect has effect which is or which cannot be touched by the effect of the word confusion. It has that rare exotic quality to it, this word flummox. How often have you heard this word? I haven't so much. I mean, it isn't commonplace to say the least. Now let's give goals to each line. This is our first baby step that we've successfully taken. We have found an alternative for confusion which has a scintillating effect. Now let's give goals to each of our lines. The goal of first line is to convey the confusion. Now the first line is self-explanatory. It has to convey the theme, convey the conflict. And the word we have arrived at its flummox when we have a word which sounds otherworldly. Try to open the line with the same word. Now your first baby step was flummox. And this could be an unwritten rule. When you're writing a poem, start the poem with a word which isn't as commonly heard. So the task is to start the poem with this word itself to make it sound poetic and not sound like a paragraph, as there's a fine difference between a paragraph and a poem, and we have to abide by that. Now let's open the poem with the word flummox. Flummoxed at. Here you can see this is our opening, which means confused at or in a dilemma at. Now at what? These are our first two words. What are you flummoxed at? Ask yourself that. If you are going through a similar struggle of whether or not to appear for that exam that you're supposed to appear, owing to an extreme lack of preparation, then ask yourself that. This dilemma of giving exams or not, flummoxed at this tug of war. So this particular line, this dilemma of giving exams or not, is encapsulated in these three words, tug of war. So let's say these are straightforward, worded out feelings I'm confused. Now, how do you convey it in an indirect speech? One hack could be learn a variety of phrases. When you learn a variety of phrases, you also start creating your own. So, there are certain scenarios which, or for all the scenarios, there are phrases given which define them. So, in this situation wherein you are in a dilemma whether to give the exam or not, this tug of war well defines it. There is a tug of war happening inside the mind of the student, whether or not he should appear for the exam. The conflict, as we earlier stated it. Now we have used tug of war to simplify the dilemma. One may go no holds barred at attempting to write a poem as there are hardly any rules. You can exploit your creative skills here. You don't have to be objective, robotic, or telephonic. This, when it comes to writing a poem, you have to exploit your creative expertise. You have to exploit your imagination at its absolute hilt, as writing a poem has no restrictions. There are no parameters set. You can travel wherever you want to. You can digress as much as you want to, given that you remain faithful to your theme, and the theme right now is conflict. Now let's write our next 3 lines. Our opening line flummoxed at this tug of war. Now the second line need to simplify it. So let's resort to simple language. Now, as we've already given the punch, our second line need not be as punchy or as complex or as creative. It could be creative, it of course needs to be creative, but it doesn't have to be heavy and in your face. It could be simple to provide for a foil for our first line. Now, in simple words, the second line is to appear or not appear. It sounds simple, but it still has a distinct quality. Because I have borrowed this style from Shakespeare, to be or not to be. Now, to be or not to be sounds very simple, but it has that little something which is otherwise called an X factor, which enthralls you completely. We've tried to ape the same here, to appear or not appear. Now, this is simple, but it still keeps your attention. It still retains the engagement of the reader. Now, let's think of our third line. The next 2 lines must speak of each of the prepositions. Now, in our conflict, what is the conflict about? To give the exam or not give. Now, your third line will speak of giving the exam. And not just giving the exam, what could possibly happen if the student appears for the exam? What good can come out of that? When the student decides to give the exam, what good could be achieved? The high of giving the exam. So our third line would be devoted to the aspect of giving the exam and the good that can come out of it. Let's see. So the third line will speak for giving the exam, which simply means if I appear, I'll land a job. It basically means if the student appears for the exam, the likelihood of his landing a job are more when he doesn't appear, and which is self-explanatory. But again, it doesn't quite pack a punch. Think more dramatic, more indirect. If I show, I could be shown upon. This is the line that we have chosen. If I show, I could be shown upon. Which simply means if I give the exam, the possibility of me landing a job goes up, and up by levels. Are you understanding it? This line is basically this line. But in poem, you cannot be direct. You have to be subterranean, poetic, philosophical. This line does the job, it delivers the goods. If I show, I could be shown upon. Now, this third line spoke of the former preposition of giving the exam. Now, our fourth line will side by not giving it. What could happen if you don't give the exam? Let's find out. Now, our next line will talk of the opposing preposition. Still, I dare, dear darkness. So, the student in his last line writes, still I dare, dear darkness. Flummoxed at this tug of war to appear or not appear. If I show, I should be shown upon. I dare darkness. ये लास्ट वर्ब हमको वापस लेना पड़ेगा क्योंकि नीचे ही नहीं जा रहा है. Now our last line will embolden the second preposition, which was to not give the exam. Now we have to throw something into the fray which speaks in favor of not giving the exam. So we have achieved the projection of our conflict. So we successfully convey the conflict. Now let's start. Flummoxed at the tug of war to appear or not appear. If I show, I could be shown upon. Now the last line is this. I dare, O darkness, my dear. In the third line, when he says, if I appear, if I show, I could be shown upon, that means I could get a job. But still, I dare, O darkness, my dear. What he's trying to say, what we're trying to say in the last line is, even though I know the fruits or the dividends which I'll be at the receiving end of giving the exam, I still behold the darkness that I'm surrounded with. I'm still okay and comfortable with not landing the job. Now, when I use the word dare, it rhymes with appear. And we've talked about both the prepositions. We've covered both sides of the conflict. Again, let me repeat. Flummoxed at this tug of war to appear or not appear. If I show, which is the third line, which means if I give the exam, I might get the job. If I show, I could be shown upon. And then the fourth line, if I don't, I would still be okay. I dare, O darkness, my dear. Now, I have a task for you. In the comfort of your home, think of a conflict which tugs at you. Use the same method, even if you're not gifted with unsurpassable talent of writing poems, still, for once, try it. Use the same method as we've just discussed. Follow the same steps. Think of one conflict that you are confronted with. It could be of watching television at home or going to cinema theatre. It could be a conflict of whether to use the mobile phone as much or not. It could be a conflict between yoga or gym. It could be a conflict between veg and non-veg. It could be anything. Think of a conflict. Follow these steps and try to craft a poem. And if you wish to learn a little bit more, if you wish to write an entire poem by yourself or an entire essay by yourself, or if you want to crack interviews or if you want to give an exam, you can join our offline classes. Till then, it's a goodbye from my side, and please do write this poem on any conflict that you're confronted by. Thank you.